Dando continuidade às atividades técnicas desse evento, para comporem o painel 2, temos aqui no palco, painel Trazendo Confiabilidade. Convidamos o moderador Sebastião Soares, presidente do IBRACON, Instituto de Auditoria Independente do Brasil, o Willy Bota, diretor sênior do International Audit and Assurance Standards Board, o IAASB, e o Ken Xiong, diretor do International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants, IESBA. Sejam muito bem-vindos e passo a palavra para o nosso moderador.
Bom dia aqui novamente a todos. A ideia aqui desse painel, a gente falou talvez na abertura um pouquinho da importância da agenda, né, com os depoimentos de vários reguladores, né, então o presidente do CFC, o presidente da CVM, eu falando no pilar da auditoria. Então a gente trouxe uma vertente da... They are saying that that's not the correct... eles estão falando que não é o slide correto. Enquanto isso eu vou fazendo... I will just make the introductions while they change it. Então, no primeiro painel, a gente trouxe um pouquinho da ótica, da visão, né, dos reguladores da profissão e do mercado de capitais, sobre a importância dessa agenda de sustentabilidade, enaltecendo, né, a importância de a gente ter esse fórum aqui, esse segundo fórum, de estarmos todos juntos nessa jornada. No primeiro painel, a gente falou sobre o reporting, né, então, voltando aqui pelo que foi reconfirmado pelo João Pedro, o presidente da CVM, em relação a building blocks, a gente falou da questão de taxonomia, né, da questão de comparabilidades, de ter frameworks de normas que permitam a comparabilidade. O segundo bloco no sentido de a gente ter reporting. E o terceiro bloco, que perpassa aqui pelo que a gente vai debater nesse painel, que é a questão do assurance, do reporting, né, no sentido de trazer a confiabilidade para essas informações. Então, a gente passa, quando a gente coloca no timeline, a gente passa a ter, eventualmente, as resoluções dos órgãos reguladores determinando o período da adoção mandatória e, mais recentemente, para a gente completar, talvez, esse tripé, a gente carecia de uma norma específica de asseguração dessas informações, né, que aí aqui é o caso da ISA 5000, emitida pelo IAASB, e também um novo código de ética e de independência. Então, acho que trazendo a ótica da regulação, a ótica de uma nova norma de auditoria para a asseguração das informações de sustentabilidade, combinado com um código de ética e independência, principalmente para contadores, não no caso do Brasil, mas em outras jurisdições, né? Você tem a inclusão de não accountants também que fazem o trabalho. Aqui a gente fecha esse triângulo. Então, o propósito aqui desse painel aqui é a gente debater um pouquinho sobre a importância de você trazer confiabilidade para as informações de sustentabilidade que estarão sendo divulgadas aí a todos os usuários. Então, passo a palavra para você, Willy. Mais uma vez, Willy, quem agradecendo aqui a vinda de vocês, né, de terem feito as agendas para se deslocar e estar aqui conosco, né? Um prazer enorme.
Thank you, Sebastian, and very happy to be here, and thank you for the invitation. It is our privilege to talk a little bit about, as you said, the tripod of reporting, assurance, and ethics. As we wait for the slides to come on, I'll just continue with the presentation, and I think the slides would, in any case, be shared with the group. So what Ken and I want to do today, as you may or may not know, is we are heading up two sister boards or two partner boards under the International Foundation for Ethics and Audit. The board that I'm the senior director of is responsible for the assurance standards, and Ken's board is responsible for the ethics standards. So we want to talk a little bit about how our boards work to enhance the reliability of external reporting. And we were asked to maybe just say a little bit about the structure in which we work. So our two boards, as I said, are two independent standard setting boards under the International Foundation for Ethics and Audit. There we go. So now you can see my picture. There, that will be better. All right, so you will see, so I'm going to actually start at the bottom of the slide and work up. So we've got the IASB and ISPA at the bottom, where we are the two standard setting boards under the International Foundation of Ethics for Ethics and Audit. And we have an oversight body, which is the Public Interest Oversight Board, and they are responsible to oversee all our standard setting work to determine whether we follow due process and to determine whether the proposals that we issue has had proper regard to the public interest. And then at the top of the layer, we've got our overall oversight that is being administered by the monitoring group. And the monitoring group really is a board of international regulators and other institutions. And there are 7 members of the monitoring group. So you've got the International Organization of Securities Commissions, IOSCO. You've got IFIAR, the International Forum for Independent Audit Regulators. You've got the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, the International Association of Insurance Supervisors, the European Commission, and the Financial Stability Board. I didn't count that, but I think that was 7. So those are the 7 monitoring group members. Our direct oversight is from the PIOB, and then we set our standards at the level of the 2 boards. You will see to the right-hand side, we also have a stakeholder advisory council that consists at present of about 30 members that are being appointed under the PIOB's nominations committee. And their task is really to provide us with strategic advice on the positioning of our boards within the market, our board's value proposition, and on our work programs. So I just wanted to give you that little bit of oversight. So I'm going to hand over to Ken to do the next few slides.
Thank you very much, Willy. And first of all, it's my pleasure to be here to be addressing all of you. And thank you really to CBAPS and the organizers to invite both Willy and me. So speaking about global standards, and Sebastian introduced, really we're looking at a trilogy of standards, the reporting standards and the reporting framework. With the reporting, there needs to be assurance, and the assurance in the case of global standards is provided by ISSA 5000, which Willy referred to earlier. And ISSA 5000 provides a robust baseline, a robust global baseline for consistent performance of quality sustainability assurance engagements to support the reliability and the credibility of the information that is reported. Together with the reporting and the assurance, there needs to be the ethics standards, and that's where ISPA comes into play. And that's my role as well, to support my board. And in fact, we have one of our board members here, Vanya Borkev, in the audience. So Vanya is one of our board members. And we have developed what we call the International Ethics Standards for Sustainability Assurance that supports the assurance work from an ethics and independence perspective, as well as ethics provisions for sustainability reporting that underpin trust and confidence in the preparation and the disclosure of sustainability information. Both are 2 boards standards represent global baselines, and our boards, IASB and ISPA, really took enormous effort into completing those standards. We undertook a very intense period of work at our boards within a period of 2 years to develop those 2 standards. And as part of that process, we undertook extensive consultation with stakeholders to make sure that those standards benefited from as wide a range of input as possible to ensure high quality standards at the end of the day. And why did we develop those standards? Well, the international regulatory community called for those standards, starting first with IOSCO. And IOSCO came out in March 2023 with a report that called for key considerations to promote an effective global assurance framework for sustainability reporting, essentially the standards for assurance and the standards for ethics and independence. And when we finalized the standards and launched those standards, IOSCO issued formal statements of support for both our board standards, essentially confirming IOSCO's support for the standards as being high quality standards for assurance and ethics to underpin and enhance consistent, comparable, and reliable sustainability reporting. So we have really the full support of IOSCO behind our two standards. And in addition to that, IOSCO really has made it very clear its expectation for our two boards to provide support for implementation and capacity building, because it's one thing to have the standards, but it's also critically important to have the local capacity to implement the standards on a consistent basis, ultimately to make sure that those standards contribute to public trust in sustainability reporting for investors, for the capital markets. So Philippe, could you flip to the next slide? So as I indicated, our two boards work very closely in developing the standards. They are global interoperable baselines. And the concept of interoperability was built into the standards from the ground up. We coordinated very closely and extensively between our two boards at all levels, at the chair level, at the board level, at the task force level, at the staff levels, and throughout the process of finalizing the standards over the course of the 2 years that it took to finalize the standards. And ISA 5000 itself is essentially premised on a baseline of ethics and independence standards that are either the ISPA code, meaning the ESA, or standards that are at least as demanding. And you see on the slides here, we've just highlighted a number of areas on which we collaborated and coordinated very closely. We have common terminology, common terms and concepts and definitions on the issue of group engagements, which are critically important for the largest entities that are reporting. We also engage very closely on the issue of value chain, the transparency and disclosures that companies and auditors have to undertake. I mentioned the hook to relevant ethical requirements in ISA 5000. That's the global baseline of the ESA. The using the work of another practitioner, use of the work of an external expert, as well as effective date, which is fully coordinated between our two standards. So these are really the standards that we now have that are out in the marketplace, and we're really out there talking to stakeholders, talking to jurisdictions like Brazil, to talking to the regions as well, because I know this conference is also sort of being broadcast around the region as well. And really, we're out on the ground talking about the standards, raising awareness and facilitating understanding and capacity building. So I'll pause here and maybe I'll switch over to you for the next few slides.
Okay, so I'll give you a quick overview of ISA 5000. I know we've got a workshop tomorrow as well where we will get into a little bit more of the details. But just at the high level, as Ken has said, we really truly believe that ISA 5000 will be the global baseline standard for sustainability assurance engagements, in particular in relation to general purpose reporting. So where the ambition is that in the end, sustainability reporting will take its position alongside financial reporting that collectively will provide data points for investors and users that will inform their decisions. So the name of the standard is General Requirements for Sustainability Assurance Engagements. And I wanted to highlight a few attributes that we believe makes this a very robust standard and appropriate to be used as a global baseline. Firstly, it is framework neutral. And that is the same as our international standards on auditing. So it doesn't matter what financial reporting framework the entity uses to prepare its sustainability information, the assurance practitioner can assure that information using ISA 5000. As Ken has said, our standard is obviously primarily an engagement standard. It tells how assurance practitioners should go about obtaining evidence to draw reasonable conclusions on which they can base their assurance report. But underpinning that is the fact that the firm has to follow robust quality management principles and relevant ethical requirements. Our standard covers both limited assurance and reasonable assurance engagement. So both are addressed in one standard. And the reason for that is because this is meant to be an overarching standard. Secondly, the reality is that both those types of engagements are being performed in practice. So that's why we follow that. And we also recognize that there's a maturity curve involved here. Reporting frameworks will continue to evolve, entities, information systems, and indeed the needs of users. And this gives a facility how each jurisdiction can decide they want to maybe start with limited assurance and then move to reasonable assurance. I know in Brazil, you've already taken the decision to go for reasonable assurance, but that's why we decided to do it in this way. Also, our standard is for use by all competent assurance practitioners, provided that they follow relevant quality management principles and relevant ethical requirements. Lastly, it applies to all sustainability information. Doesn't matter what the subject matter is or the topic of the subject matter or the sustainability matter, whether it's climate change, biodiversity, labor practices, human rights, energy, doesn't matter. It can be one of those. It can be a combination of those. It tells the practitioner how to go through the assurance engagement process. I almost said flip the slide, but I've got the... In developing the standard, our focus is very much on supporting the consistent performance of quality engagements. And as I said, what is very important is because we lay out a process for a practitioner to go in, get the right evidence that will support them to form a conclusion that will be expressed in an assurance report that has been designed to enhance the confidence of the users about the reported information. We had to address certain key items. And those items include that you have to comply with all the requirements in the standard. There are certain requirements that are conditional. And obviously, if the condition doesn't exist, then the requirement doesn't apply. The next 2 points on this slide talks about the issue of competence. So the engagement leader or engagement partner in the first instance must have appropriate assurance skills and techniques. They have to be assurance providers. And they have to have sufficient sustainability competence to be able to take responsibility for the conclusion. And then the broader engagement team, together with any experts that are used, have to collectively have the appropriate sustainability competence, assurance competence, and sufficient time to be able to perform the engagement. We also recognize in the standard the interaction between the sustainability assurance practitioner and the financial statements auditor. I did see from the last IFEX State of Play report that in Brazil, at least for the companies that were included in that survey, that in 75% of the cases, it was actually the statutory auditor that also did the assurance engagement. And then lastly, we were very much focused on addressing some of the key areas of challenge that our stakeholders told us about. I will go into a few of those as I go through. Now, when you look at this standard provides a complete package. So it is a standalone, self-contained standard that addresses the whole assurance engagement process. So it has requirements and application material that guides the practitioner from the point of engagement, acceptance and continuance, planning the engagement, designing their procedures right through to where they issue the assurance report. So it covers everything that is needed for the assurance engagement. Alongside the standard, we have also issued a ISA 5000 implementation guide that also follows this exact process, but in a little bit plainer language, walks you through the standard, provides examples, illustrations, etc. And then very importantly, again, underpinned by relevant ethical requirements and quality management. So on the next 2 slides, I just wanted to give you a sense of some of the key items that sort of were, that required a lot of our attention and that were most prominent in us developing the standard, because these were the areas where our stakeholders highlighted that these are the areas that are really difficult. Now, I don't pretend to go into all of these in detail, but I'm just going to highlight 1 or 2 of them. A few that I want to highlight here is, for example, the scope of the standard. So as I said earlier, remember, sustainability assurance can be performed on the entire set of the sustainability information or on parts of it. And that is fine. You can do it either on everything or on parts of it, as long as the preconditions for an assurance engagement is met. As I said earlier, the scope is all sustainability matters and all aspects of sustainability matters, including greenhouse gas emissions. So those of you that follow our work closely, you will remember that up to now we've had an assurance standard on greenhouse gas statements, ISAE 3410. We did at our March meeting this year decide to withdraw that standard, and that standard will be withdrawn effective from the effective date of ISA 5000, because then only ISA 5000 will apply. Other item that I wanted to touch on is materiality. This always is a very important topic, even from the reporting side. And so what we needed to do is to make the distinction between the entity's application of materiality, which is primarily done through a materiality process, or what we called in our standard the entity's process for identifying the information to be reported. And then the practitioner, remember the practitioner comes in at the point where an entity has prepared the information, gives it to the practitioner and says, give me assurance on this information. So the practitioner looks at materiality through a lens of the potential or possible misstatements of that information. And we try to clarify that. And then we also had to acknowledge that certain reporting frameworks accommodate both financial materiality and impact materiality. So we had to accommodate the notion of double materiality in our standard as well. Another item was fraud and non-compliance with laws and regulations. We have given appropriate attention to this, but obviously not in the same amount of detail as we would do, for example, in the international standards on auditing, because this is an overarching standard. So commensurate with the overarching nature of the standard, we have addressed the risks of fraud, non-compliance with laws and regulations. And again, in the implementation guide, there's actually a very convenient appendix that summarizes all the places where these items are highlighted. On the next slide, also just going to highlight a couple of points. In terms of group engagements, we introduced group concepts. We obviously started to try and do it similar to what you have in financial reporting in a group audit. Now you have a group sustainability assurance engagement. But obviously what's very different in the case of sustainability assurance is that you've got this unique instance where you could have information from entities that are not part of the controlled group, which are part of value chain entities upstream or downstream the value chain. And we had to accommodate that by distinguishing between what we call group components and value chain components. And that's one area, as Ken mentioned, where we had very close coordination between our boards to make sure that we are aligned on those concepts. Closely related to that is in the fourth column there is we've set separate requirements for how the practitioner obtains sufficient appropriate evidence if they're going to use the work already performed by another practitioner, or they use a practitioner's expert to do certain of the work, or in certain instances they use the work of internal audit. So there are separate sections that deal with those requirements. Then the second last block there is limited assurance versus reasonable assurance. So we had to make sure, although we address both types of engagements, it also had to be clear and understand what the difference is. And especially at an engagement level, what's the difference in work effort? And we distinguish that by having certain requirements only apply for limited assurance and other requirements apply to reasonable assurance. There are many requirements that apply to both, but especially in the area of risk identification and assessment, responding to assessed risks, and in reporting, there is a distinction between the two. And we've done it by presenting those requirements in a tabular format, because what you will find is that you have the same topic being addressed, but the work effort may be different between limited and reasonable assurance. So it's actually very convenient to have them side by side, because then you can also see what the contrast is between the two. And then lastly, we've put a lot of focus on the reporting side in terms of exactly requirements around the content of the report, and then also providing illustrative examples of reports, because in the end, that's the product. That is what users are going to see, is the assurance report. So I think I'm going to leave it here and turn over to Ken.
Thank you very much, Vili. And if you don't mind, Vili, if you could just flip to the next slide. So I will talk a little bit about the ESA, which is International Ethics Standards for Sustainability Assurance, which Vili sort of touched on in terms of the the baseline for ethics and independence standards that are the relevant ethical requirements that are a condition for engagements undertaken in accordance with ISA 5000. I'll start off first with a very simple question as to why ethics matters. Why does it matter for anyone and for all of us? It is a critical piece of the puzzle, if you will, in terms of the whole reporting paradigm in terms of the ecosystem itself. And that's why our standard is actually underpins both the reporting and the assurance. Ethics plays a very crucial role in maintaining integrity and stability in markets. And why do we say that? Well, it's all well and good to have the regulation in place. It's all well and good to have the reporting standards in place. But ultimately, it is people who are applying and who are complying with the regulations and the standards. And it's about the mindset and it's about the behaviors. And as we know, people operate in different contexts that can create threats to their mindset and to their ethical behavior. And without having a firm grounding in high quality standards of ethics, we can have any number of requirements in the regulation or in reporting standards. Still, what will be provided in terms of information to investors, capital markets, and other users will not meet the expected level of trust. So we have to have the ethics. The consequences are all too familiar with all of us, and I've just listed some of those on this slide. As you can see, there's loss of trust potentially for both companies and audit firms that are also involved in assurance engagements. Regulatory sanctions are all very clear and palpable and concrete, and we know that in some jurisdictions already regulators have come out with very strict sanctions because of issues of greenwashing, misleading reporting, and so forth. There is potential for reputational damage, which is clear, again, both on the reporter side as well as in the assurer side when things go wrong. And ultimately, it is harm to the broader financial system if things go wrong. And therefore, ethics plays a very critical role in maintaining that critical concept of public trust and confidence in business integrity and independent assurance. And all of these really translate for the companies themselves as well as auditors into competitive advantage, customer loyalty, and business growth. And therefore, our standards really play a very critical role in underpinning that public trust. But if you don't mind moving to the next slide. So the ESA is a global baseline. What are its key characteristics? The ESA applies to a certain group of assurance engagements, sustainable assurance engagements, which I'll touch on very briefly in a moment. But those standards are equivalent to the standards for ethics and independence that apply to audits of financial statements. And the reason why we do that is because the ESA is focused on information that is prepared in accordance with a general purpose framework. And that information is either required by law or regulation to be disclosed or is made available publicly for investors and other users for their decision-making purposes. The ESA is also profession agnostic, just as ISA 5000 is, meaning that it is intended to be applied by all sustainability assurance practitioners, whether they are auditors or whether they are practitioners from other professions, whether they are engineers, whether they're consultants, whether they are even lawyers. But those, our standard essentially is designed to be applied by all of these sustainability assurance practitioners. And we did that in response to what the international regulatory community asked of our board as well as IWSP to make those standards available and capable of being used by all sustainability assurance practitioners. And we heard that call loud and clear from IOSCO as well as from the Financial Stability Board. In the case of SSB, it was really very, very clear in terms of its advocacy for trustworthy climate-related disclosures. The ESA is also intended to be and is designed to be a standalone set of standards. It's a complete suite of standards that doesn't rely on other parts of the ISPA code, but it is a standalone. It is still contained in our code of ethics, our global code of ethics, but it is standalone. It can be used by any sustainability assurance practitioner. And finally, it is framework neutral, meaning to say it applies regardless of the reporting framework that is used for the disclosures of sustainability information, and regardless as well of the assurance framework that is used for the assurance engagement. Billy, if you could flip to the next slide. So just a word about the scope of the ESA. As I mentioned, it doesn't apply, unlike ISA 5000, which applies to all sustainability assurance engagements, as Billy mentioned earlier. Our ESA is designed for a subset of sustainability assurance engagements. And that subset is, which I mentioned just briefly earlier, it's about, if you see on the left-hand side here, the bottom box, only those engagements on sustainability information reported in accordance with a general purpose framework. For example, the standards issued by ISSP or GRI standards, or in the case of the EU, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. And that information is either required by law, regulation, or publicly disclosed to support decision-making by investors or other users. For those engagements on assurance engagements on sustainability information that is outside of this specific scope, we have a separate suite of standards that covers those engagements. And that suite of standards is, in terms of the independent standards, these standards are contained in what we call the Part 4B of our international code. And those standards currently apply only to professional accountants, but we encourage other sustainability assurance providers to use those standards if they are undertaking those engagements. Next slide, please, Lily. Now, when it comes to reporting, and I know there are a number of preparers in the audience here, just so you are aware, when we completed our project on sustainability, we also did significant revisions to our extent ethics standards for
englobaram essas normas éticas de relatório.
Okay, so I'll just continue. Yeah. So
eu vou continuar, então.
Maybe I'm running out of time.
Eu acho que eu estou ficando sem tempo.
Anyway, so.
It's been an automatic translation.
Oh, it is. It is. Okay, good.
Ah, entendi. Bom, então tá.
Yeah. So there are a number of issues that
há
we
diversas questões que nós verificamos
when we thought about issues of reporting.
Quando nós pensamos nas questões do relatório. Não sou eu, juro que não sou eu, gente.
It's a technological issue. That's what you were saying in English.
Okay.
It's translating into Portuguese.
All right. Okay, it seems it stopped now because you were talking, Sebastian. All right. Okay, so it seems we can continue. Yes. So as you can see here, what I've highlighted here are a number of. My point is on this slide is the context and the reality matters when it comes to making sustainability and preparing sustainability disclosures. It is a context in which a preparer finds himself or herself when preparing those disclosures, and the context can create different kinds of pressures, different kinds of risks that will lead the preparer to basically act in an unethical manner with regard to these disclosures. For example, you can have a lot of different kinds of pressures, market pressures, internal pressures to meet targets and so forth. The nature of the information itself matters. Again, it's just all part of the context. And, we heard earlier in the session before the break about the fact that we are still in the early stages of sustainability reporting. The landscape is kind of evolving and practices are developing and so forth. And that is very much the case when it comes to sustainability information. The information is qualitative, it's forward-looking, it's highly judgmental. There are assessments about risks, opportunities, and so forth. The reporting frameworks as well are relatively new. whether it's ISSB standards or ESRSs or GRI. I mean, these standards are now being implemented in practice, and there's a lot of learnings to be gained. The nature of the information set as being wrote, it can be very complex. So all to say is the context is important, and whenever the context is fluid, is evolving, is great, that creates risks to the preparer when thinking about the decisions they need to make or judgments they need to make in making those disclosures. If you can flip to the next slide. And so what we've done is we've made a number of revisions to our standards and reporting, but we've not started from the ground up because we have based those standards on our existing, well-established, long-settled ethics standards for reporting, financial reporting, but we've essentially adapted our ethics standards for financial reporting to sustainability reporting, and dealt with a number of those ethical issues that can arise in practice, whether it's about managing conflicts of interest, whether that's about dealing with business pressures, internal pressures, market pressures, investor pressures, whether it is about using the work of an external expert. And when it comes to sustainable reporting, the entity itself may have recourse to experts in different fields. And whether it's about dealing with issues of non-compliance with laws and regulations, a number of issues that we deal with on the reporting side. But ultimately, what we're intending to address is really the role of the preparer as a first line of defense, because at the end of the day, whatever gets published, whatever gets disclosed has to go first through the preparer and their ability to prepare disclosures that are going to be truthful, reliable, consistent, and trustworthy. And that's really what we are intended to achieve when it comes to reporting. So I'll pause here, Sebastian. I think that completes my presentation.
Yeah, I will raise a question. So I would like to ask you just to use that, because I will raise the question in Portuguese for you to understand my timeline here. Quando a gente volta, quando nós tivemos a primeira edição, né, do Fórum do CBPS no ano passado, nós ainda não tínhamos o novo Código de Ética emitido, assim como também não tínhamos a ISA 5000 emitida. E durante o processo de audiência pública, né, tanto o CFC como o IBRACON, como outras associações, elas vinham se manifestando com algumas preocupações do ponto de vista de interesse público, de transparência e de qualidade, em relação a tanto a norma, né, a ISA 5000, como o novo Código de Ética, de eventualmente ser não para non-accountants, né, para practitioners, mas não para non-accountants. E o nosso raciocínio na época, o nosso debate, foi sempre uma analogia com demonstrações financeiras, né? Porque eu vou fazer analogia aqui com a demonstração financeira. Quando um preparer, né, quando um preparador, ou quando um auditor, ou quando um órgão fiscalizador olha uma demonstração financeira, você tem vários componentes onde você, como contador ou auditor, você também não detém aquele skill específico, né, aquele conhecimento específico, e você conta com o auxílio de outros especialistas para te ajudar na elaboração das demonstrações financeiras ou na auditoria. Então, quando você vai fazer um valuation de um determinado ativo, quando você vai debater alguma questão tributária, são skills que, eventualmente, o contador e o auditor não detêm, e numa demonstração financeira, você conta com o apoio de um especialista para te ajudar na elaboração e na auditoria, mas a responsabilidade continua final sendo tua como contador-auditor. E essa foi a preocupação que o CFC teve quando emitiu lá em outubro de 23 a resolução 1710, onde atribuiu ao contador a responsabilidade pela elaboração, pela compilação e pela asseguração das informações de sustentabilidade. E por quê? Porque no final nós estamos falando de informações financeiras materiais de sustentabilidade. embora a conotação ainda seja de informações de sustentabilidade, nós estamos falando sobre divulgação de informações financeiras de sustentabilidade. Então, o CFC, na época, entendeu que essa responsabilidade, nós iremos continuar contando com o apoio de engenharistas, de ambientalistas, de sociólogos, ou seja, para aquelas áreas onde o contador ou o auditor não detém o skill, nós vamos continuar, assim como nas demonstrações financeiras, nas informações financeiras de sustentabilidade, nós vamos continuar contando com a ajuda dos especialistas. Ken, fiz tudo isso para fazer uma pergunta e talvez disseminar uma confusão que a gente tem escutado um pouco, né? Porque no caso da ISA 5000, ela é mais clara porque durante todo o debate da audiência pública, ela tinha o contexto de professional agnostic, né? Então, assim, a gente sempre debateu dentro da norma de auditoria a questão do professional agnostic. No caso do Código de Ética e Independência, e aqui eu estive com a Gabriela, né, umas 2 semanas atrás, lá no evento do Crescer, e confesso que também, para mim, foi clarificador, não sei se essa palavra, ficou mais claro para mim. A gente escutou por um período, Ken, de que o novo Código de Ética, na parte 5, era única e exclusivamente para non-accountants. Então, talvez se criou um pouco de confusão de que a parte 1, 2, 3 e 4 continuaria sendo aplicável a accountants e que a parte 5 ela estaria sendo eventualmente desenvolvida única e exclusivamente para non-accountants. E nós estamos no processo de tradução, né, das normas, né, bastante extenso o novo Código de Ética e Independência, mas para mim desmistificou um pouquinho, porque não, e é isso que eu queria que você comentasse, né? A parte 5, ela também é aplicável para accountants, ela trata de informações de sustentabilidade, né? Então, essa é uma confusão importante talvez esclarecer, para deixar claro que a parte 5 também continua sendo aplicável para accountants, ele só faz referência às informações de sustentabilidade.
Yes. Okay, that works? Yes, thank you very much, Sebastian. That's a very important question that you've raised. And in fact, it's not a question that's been raised uniquely in the context of Brazil, because we've heard also that question in a number of other jurisdictions. And as we've engaged with different stakeholders around the world, this concept of profession agnostic ethics and independent standards that, as we know, the ethics code as it stands today has always been a code for professional accountants. But now IESPA, as a global body that sets ethics standards, has turned this ESR or what we call the Part 5 of the code also into a suite of standards that can also be used by non-accountants. But that is indeed how it has been designed. It has been designed to be usable and be applicable by both auditors, professional accountants, as well as non-accountants. And I mentioned earlier some examples of who those non-accountants could be. It could be consultants, it could be engineers, it could be conformity assessment bodies that perform assurance standards in accordance with ISO standards. So there are a number of those practitioners around the world. In fact, in some jurisdictions, they comprise the largest share of assurance practitioners who perform sustainability assurance engagements on a voluntary basis, admittedly, because jurisdictions, not all jurisdictions have already put in place regulation to mandate sustainability assurance. But that's a very important concept to understand, which is that ESR Part 5 is absolutely applicable and is intended to be applicable by the accountancy profession, by auditors. So it depends on what the jurisdiction determines as to who should be authorized to be the assurance providers. If in Brazil, the decision has been made that, whether it's by under law regulation, that's only audit firms who will be authorized to perform the assurance engagements, then the ESR will be applicable already. And all you need to do is just, of course, translate the standards, but already start to train and educate audit firms and as to how to apply the standards. In other jurisdictions, though, the legislator or regulator has made a decision to open the market to both auditors and non-accountants. I mean, just to give you some examples, in Europe, there are a few jurisdictions, not all, in fact, they're in the minority. A number of member states have decided to open the market to also non-accountants to perform sustainability assurance engagements. Some of those are France, you have Denmark, you have Spain, you have Lithuania, you have Romania, and to some extent the UK as well, but UK is outside the EU, but UK as well has opened its market, but on a voluntary basis to allow non-auditors to perform sustainability assurance engagements. So there are a number of those jurisdictions that have made the decision to open their markets for assurance to non-auditors. And what we are saying in those jurisdictions is you can also use the Part 5 or the ESR because it's also intended to be applied by non-auditors. If you were to read the ESR, it is the language that we have used to draft the standard. It is neutral. It is admittedly based on the standards that the profession has been long used to, but it is drafted in a neutral way, using neutral, agnostic language, terms and concepts so that essentially any and all sustainability assurance practitioners can apply the standards.
Yeah, very clear. Just time flies. I would like to thank you again for your participation and just leave you for 2 final minutes comments. What would be the best advices that you would give to the audience? Willie, we'll start with you.
Yeah, that's a question that can keep us busy for an hour. I think the bottom line is when Ken referred previously to also the sort of developments that prompted us to take a more urgent approach to developing these standards. I think what has happened is that we have seen that there's a move from voluntary reporting to mandatory reporting. Admittedly, we've also now seen, especially at the beginning of the year, that in some jurisdictions, there's a little bit of a slowdown because we've got the whole drive about deregulation and simplification and reducing burden and all of that, which to our mind simply means that the journey in certain places will now be at a different pace. I don't think the journey will stop. The demand for this has already been established. And that you can clearly see from the IFEX State of Play report. So that is not going to change. And therefore, it is good that jurisdictions like Brazil are taking the right steps in terms of bedding down the reporting requirements, the assurance requirements, the ethical requirements. And we know at the jurisdictional level, one of the big challenges is that of capacity building. We've heard that the other day when we had our JSS, our General Jurisdictional Standard Settings meeting as well. And as the IAASB and ethics, we will do our part to try and support that globally through our implementation and adoption support, which is actually the topic of the next panel that we're going to discuss as well. Okay.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. I'll be brief. And my advice is embrace those standards, the global standards, and embrace change because we live in basically the era of change. And as we know, we are seeing a paradigm shift from historical financial reporting or reporting on historical financial information and assurance that goes with the audit to reporting on sustainability information and the assurance that goes with the sustainability reporting as well. And all of you in the audience who are listening, that is an opportunity. I would not see it as a challenge, but see it as an opportunity for all of you to really build the expertise to really make you really develop the knowledge, the skill space, and essentially become the go-to people when it comes to sustainability reporting. Because as Willie says, the demand is out there already. The ship has already sailed. We're not rewinding the clock. Investors are looking for that information. They are looking for trustworthy information. And for all of this, we need the capacity. We need the expertise locally. And that's why I would encourage all of you, build the expertise in the standards, understand the standards. They're not as daunting as perhaps they might appear. especially when it comes to the ethics and independent standards, because we didn't start from the ground up, especially for accountants and auditors. You will be familiar if you've been, you know the code. These are standards that have been around for a long time, and that those standards comprise the base of the standards that will be issued when it comes to sustainability reporting and assurance. Thank you.
No, wonderful. Great panel. We need to recognize the tremendous works done by either YESBA and IWSP. So tremendous work. I know that it's not easy constructing those standards in the past 2-3 years. So I would like to thank you for the great panel. I think that we are going to have a stop for lunch, right? And we'll be back at... E vocês estão traduzindo em português para eles? Eu queria...
Mas antes, vamos tirar uma foto oficial, né? Vamos aproveitar nossos painelistas.
Só aplaudir aqui os nossos painelistas, por favor.
Muito obrigada, Ken, Sean, Willy Bota e Sebastian Soares.